I do get concerned that if everybody's going in this direction, it will saturate the market and then it will not be listened to. So
Right.
how do we continue to go above and beyond?
Absolutely. Are we going to find ourselves in a saturated market where everyone's talking about purpose and it'll just be an echo chamber and no one's going to stand out, right? We saw this with the green movement. Do you remember in the green movement, a few companies were like those I don't know, hippie types who started it, and then everyone did it. Everyone was selling their products in a green, like a Hessian bag, and then it became meaningless because as long as you had the Hessian bag, who knew what the truth was? Here's what I think's going on. There's a cycle. There's an evolution in this conversation, and it's a cycle, but it's all the same conversation. It used to be green, and then everyone got saturated with green. Then it used to be, and then now it's purpose. And then at some point it'll be saturated with purpose. And then it's going to be transparency. And that's going to be saturated, and everyone's going to say how transparent they are. And then everyone's going to say we're accountable. And it's the same conversation. I love that Martin Luther King phrase that what is the arc of history bends in the direction of what's right. I think what we've done over the last several decades, particularly since the 50s, is we got drunk on the power of media. And we've layered on this deception. We can tell people anything and they'll buy it. And we've layered on disingenuousness and inauthenticity and a lack of transparency and so on. Thanks to the web, social media, and smartphones, whether we like it or not, each one of those rings of the onion is being peeled back. Transparency is being imposed on people right now. So that's just one part of the answer is, I think it will evolve over time and it'll shift from the lens of green to sustainable to purpose to transparency to accountability. But it's the same conversation, different nuances. And what's going on is you're peeling back these different barriers to accountability that we've built over the last several decades. Then within that category itself, there's going to be two defining qualities. If you're about women's empowerment, say, and everyone's saying women's empowerment, as you'll see through our work, you need to have a proprietary point of view. And if you have that, you're going to be ahead of half the people out there. Because most people spend all their marketing dollars doing one wonderful thing, which is broadcasting their schizophrenia to everyone. They're like, oh my God, we're this over here, and what do you want? What do you want? Everyone's like, man, you're crazy. You're crazy, and you've wasted all your money. If you have a clear and distinct and consistent point of view, you will stand out over 50% of the people. If you then communicate that more effectively, which is what we're going to be talking over the next couple of days, where you're off yourself and on your audience and you give them a role to play, both as employees and consumers and so on, you'll beat the other 50%. The reason Unilever has done so well is they have a clear point of view, they've with difficulty rallied everything behind that singular point of view, they're framing content the right way. So the way you distinguish yourself is A, recognize there's a fundamental shift going on, B, have a proprietary point of view, and C, tell that story more effectively. And really that's always been the case with marketing. There's always been a billion people out there screaming about what they're doing. He who tells the story best is going to win. Not just because it's a better story, but because you're empowering people to tell that story to others. Because we now live in a world of connective tissue, right? Through social media. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was in advertising, you didn't think of an ad so that someone else could share it with somebody else. But now you need to empower everybody to become your storyteller. So if you do those three things well, you will crush the competition in the best sense. Another question? Who's got a query about their brand? This is all on you. Who's got a question where they think there's a tension point, whether it's employees or whether it's the market? Yeah.
I have a brand.
We have Mike here? Thanks. I'm sorry. One sec.
Yeah, I have a brand that's for profit, so it puts me kind of. I have a brand that's for profit,
Right.
so it puts me in a different light.
Right.
And my brand is about celebrating difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's about accepting oneself, honoring people and their stories.
Right.
And now I realize I'm too generic, because I am like going into libraries and telling the story. I want to align myself to groups that deal with anti-bullying, transgender, humanistic concerns,
Right.
Refugees, and so how do I
you
distinguish myself,
Right.
and how do I define a strong marketing
This is a
plan?
wonderful question because the lady is sharing that she has a brand that celebrates difference, yet how do you differentiate yourself when you can speak to refugees, you can talk to different versions of how we live and love and all those different things. There's lots of different ways you can frame difference. Here's the fundamental shift, which most brands miss. Most brands talk about the problem. And what you're doing is you're talking about the problem. You're talking about a lack of tolerance for those who are different in life. And there's a lot of people talking about that, and they're all saying this person's different and that's okay, and this person's different and that's okay, and this person's different. What you need to do is shift from the problem to the solution. You need to focus on the end state, that positive end future state that you want to create. For example, I'm not saying this is right, but for example, diversity or difference drives innovation. And your story becomes an innovation story, facilitated by difference towards an end state where we've got a more innovative, sustainable, wonderful planet out there, instead of talking about the problem, which is it's okay to be different. Do you see that distinction? Unilever is not talking about we should be more sustainable. They're putting it out there, sustainable living. Starbucks is not saying we should share things more easily or happily. They're talking about a shared planet. Chipotle is not talking about we should produce food better. They are stating food with integrity. What is the end state that you uniquely want to own so that you can point to that and say, difference just is more than okay. Difference is an asset. Difference drives innovation. Difference is what makes life rich. Difference drives creativity. When you do that, you will put yourself much further down the track than your competitors that are sort of knocking themselves out in an echo chamber or hall of mirrors, all talking about the problem. Does that make sense? Most brands, even when they come to be purposeful, confine themselves to the current cultural conversation, which is focused on the problem. Instead of positing an end state that we can aspire to, they're not promising it. It's something aspirational, and there's a gold rush going on right now in terms of who owns what. Unilever 5 years ago says, we want to own sustainability, sustainable living. No one else can talk about that without butting up against them now, right? IBM, smarter planet. Starbucks, shared planet. Chipotle, food with integrity. People are locking up these aspirational end states. So I would suggest that when you look at difference, it's much more than saying it's okay. It's saying difference drives what? And when you look at that emotional pie, is it innovation? Is it tolerance? Is it multiculturalism, whatever it might be? Choose what you want to own. And you can do research to that end, what is most meaningful to your different constituents and that sort of thing, and then drive towards that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Question here? Mike over there, thanks.
Well, it's not about any specific business, but I think it's something that's very strong in Brazil right now, maybe in another country as well. You talked about shifting from business as usual.
Right.
But what if the biggest and most powerful and influential companies in your country are business as usual?
Right.
And they have a huge influence on government and on politicians, and they do everything they can to stop certain innovations and certain types of business that can move the country forward, you know?
Right.
I think something that illustrates that very well is the Uber situation. Uber is trying to penetrate Brazilian market,
Yeah.
but the taxi drivers, along with the government, are doing everything they possibly can to stop it. So how does a country move forward like that, and how do you as a company think, okay, I'm going to do something that's not business as usual, but look at the amount of challenges that I'm going to be facing?
It's a wonderful question, and the question is, when you've got the whole country against you, corporations, basically working in partnership with government to frustrate change, what do you do? Uber is a great example. I mean, what have they done? They have just beat their head against the wall all the way through and kept going and kept going. The same with Airbnb and all these other disruptive sort of shared economy companies. But there's two choices typically what you have. You either have a visionary leader that facilitates that change and everyone says, oh yeah, we agree now because he said so. We've never had that experience inside an office, have we? Or there's a crisis. So look at the auto industry with the global economic meltdown here in the US, from all the resistance and dependence on fossil fuels through to this alternative energy race. Look at what's happening with VW. And last year, there was a private closed-door event for the 600 global marketing leads at the VW Group, which included Lamborghini, Bentley, Audi, Porsche, Skoda, all their brands, 12 different car marques. And there was 3 keynotes, and I was one of them in Dusseldorf. They didn't listen to a word I said. Or they did, but they're like, hey, there's a faster way to do it. But that's a crisis. Chancellor Merkel is now saying, my gosh, this has really compromised whether people want to do business in Germany. And it was driven by a failure in terms of their diesel engine engineers to actually provide the engineering solution they needed, so they cheated to get there. And, so there's going to be a seismic shift in Germany to shore that up. I think, look at Apple right now. Steve Jobs wasn't huge on the philanthropic front, And now Tim Cook is very strident in his leadership around anti-discrimination, and also Steve Jobs' wife has just made this huge donation towards education. So unless you have a visionary leader like a Paul Polman who comes in, or for example at a country level, was it Norway that just declared they're going to be the first alternative energy, 100% alternative energy country in the world? Was it Norway? This week, last week? Denmark. They said they're going to be the first country that only uses renewable energy, the first of how many to come? So that's how it changes. It either changes through a visionary or it changes through a crisis. And I think all you can do at your level is to be an undeniable success. And you have to work harder. You have to be more resilient. You have to align yourself with like-minded and passionate people. But the tide is in your favor. The tide is in your favor. There is so much exposure of leaders at the corporate level and the political level now for disingenuousness or outright corruption. It's only going to continue. Why? Because the issues that are compromising people's experience of life are only going to get more acute. And there's going to be more scrutiny on what they're doing and more transparency through the web, and there's going to be fewer places to hide. And I don't want to sound Pollyanna about it, but I don't know, when I see all the things, how they dig up things on the web now and expose what's really going on, I'm incredibly heartened. I go, wow, this is amazing. So I think the time for Brazil and other countries will come, particularly as momentum builds around the world as well. When you see countries like Denmark, when you see leaders like Paul Polman and others. So I think being at the front line is never easy, but it's fun. Keeps you awake because you have to duck a lot. Question, yeah. Oh, behind, sorry, the lady behind, blue. She said she's kind of loud.
Yeah, the challenge that I have with my brand, we've been in business for over 50 years, and over the last 50 years, we have changed names. This will be the 6th time coming up January 1st, so it's more of a rebranding issue. And the issue is because of the changes in the economy,
Yeah.
Companies, merging to be able to make it. So the challenge is, how do you continue based on your success with your consumers to continue to rebrand your name so many times?
Well, how do you continue your success as a company when you're rebranding your name? Firstly, if the company is being successful, then I'd want to understand why you want to rebrand. Yeah, she doesn't either, so that's the conversation to be had. We're going to spend 6 months doing this. Why are we doing it? I don't know either. We've had that conversation in the beginning. But also, I think it is difficult changing your name because not only are you kind of incurring all the cost of doing that and sort of socializing it through your entire organization, all that good stuff, at the same time, you're robbing your constituents, your customers, your consumers, and your partners and the media of amplifying your story effectively because, oh, who are you now? Oh, no, I mean, who are you now? Like, what, they're like, who am I today? And if you do that too much, they start to get a little bit gun shy. We better not put that in writing because it might change in 6 months' time. But no, I think consistency is key. The great opportunity for all of us as marketers is that we can empower our entire brand community to be an extension of our marketing department. How many of you in your Facebook feed have seen people talking about a brand or something they liked? Every single one of us, right? Every one of us. And the reason people are doing that because they've aligned at some profound level, whether it's a non-profit or for-profit, they're doing something meaningful. When you change your name so often, you confuse your audience and you rob yourself of them of that capacity. So I would look at it very, very seriously. And if the company is being successful, I would look at what is driving that success, what is that through line that has driven that success, and frame it around that. And back out of that into what the company name should be and then stick to it. And then the last comment on the naming issue, if you can build the values into the name, I think that's even more powerful. For example, when Google bought that thing that goes in the top of your roof in your house that's going to collect all the data on everything you do, they didn't call it a fire extinguisher or a smoke alarm. They called it Nest. Nest. It's a Nest. Nest. We First is a fundamental proposition about prioritizing the interests of the collective. It is a values proposition. So if you have a blank slate right now, I would look at how you reframe the company name as a values proposition rather than something that is just kind of could mean anything and then you have to contextualize through a tagline. Let's have some questions. Employee advocacy, in my mind, sometimes is a little bit unsexy in the sense that we're all in a rush to get out to the marketplace. We rush past the story to the telling. So what challenges do you have with your employees? What is a frustration? What has worked and what hasn't worked? What is a challenge you'd like to overcome? Who's got a question? Yeah.
Thanks for that. I think this is actually one of the main areas that's often overlooked in companies. And I guess my question to you is, how do you drive employee engagement when corporate management or top management and leadership are very risk adverse, and they consider employee engagement almost a luxury of time that, you know, if you're trying to meet the bottom line, we don't have that time
Yeah,
to allocate, even though it's important based on the statistics you've just shared. So.
Well, it's interesting. The question is, how do you convince sort of risk-averse leadership to get behind employee engagement when it's really low down on the list of priorities? I would start by showing them, well, asking them to share what their profit and loss sheet looks like. And look at the line items and say, okay, what is the most expensive investment you're making each year? And undoubtedly, it's their people. And in terms of replacing people, the costs associated with that. And then secondly, I would share a lot of the data that we've seen today, which is, wow, there's huge upside to engaging your employees. But the reality is this: there's only one thing riskier than doing the same thing as you've always done, and that's not doing anything. I mean, given what we're seeing here today, given the way the marketplace is changing, given the competitive landscape, let alone kind of, you know, your competitors, long-standing competitors, what about new companies that are coming through? And what about the demographics? I mean, to be in leadership position and to ignore the true or full potential of your employee base is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of failure. I mean, outright, it's a mistake to ignore your employees. But given millennials and Gen Z and what they care about, and given the competitive landscape that they find themselves in, and given the data points that are out there in terms of the value add that employee engagement can be, not just engagement at work because they're more productive, but advocacy across social media. You are robbing the company of such incredible, incredible assets. So I think I would ask them to look at human capital, not through the lens of some sort of dry bricks and mortar asset, but actually flesh and blood, and to look at the costs associated with that. That would be the first place. Then I would corral relevant data to show the potential upside by engaging their employees by, you know, independent, credible sources like we're sharing today. And then I would say, okay, how do we align employee engagement with your goals, which are all profit motives? And you actually back out of their goals and position these employee advocacy efforts in terms of achieving those goals. And then invariably you'll have open ears. And then, as I mentioned earlier today, it's always compelling to show the competitive landscape, the way that people inside your industry and leaders in other industries are leveraging employee engagement to drive their success. So I'm finding less and less leadership are willing or blinkered enough to ignore their employees outright, but I think each one of those approaches would be very compelling. Who else has got a question with employees? Yeah.
You referred to training employees as one of the biggest investments a corporation can make.
Right.
How do you move sort of CEO mentality away from, well, if we profile our employees, they might get poached by competitors. And there's a lot of sort of that mentality, especially in the B2B space.
So the question is, in the B2B space in particular, if you train your employees, they may get poached?
Right. Oh, no. If you're profiling them
If you're profiling them.
and you're putting them out into public consumption, then they might
Interesting.
get
Do other people
poached.
have a problem with that? You don't want to tell anyone who your employees are in case they get poached? I mean, is that a real, yeah, a little bit? I would imagine so. I think with LinkedIn and I think with so many other opportunities out there, the brighter the spotlight you point at your employees, you're kind of creating a rod for your own back because you're celebrating your employees and at the same time you're creating an onus on yourself to make sure that they're sufficiently motivated to stay. So I think, you know, but I would like to think as a combination of being purposeful outright, by giving them a meaningful public role to play and constantly rewarding and recognizing them, that they would want to stay. I think we heard earlier from Shannon that millennials are predisposed to be, was it fight or flight? They just kind of like, I've been here a while and I'm out of here. So either hire old people or lots of young people. But no, I would think by having a clearly defined purpose and celebrating them and constantly upgrading how you're going to actually, you know, shine a spotlight on them and give them roles to play, I think it'd be a very, very powerful way to keep them there. But there's always going to be some sort of turnover and so on, but that's not a question I come across a lot in terms of You don't want to shine a spotlight on your employees because they may get poached by somebody else. I think the poaching game is so alive and well anyway. I mean, LinkedIn, you just go there and you put in a profile and you can pay for upgrade and you can get whatever you want and it's one email away. I mean, it's quantum leaps from where it used to be 3 or 4 or 5 years ago where you actually had to kind of find out who's doing something. Now you just get a profile. So I think if that's going to happen, it's going to happen anyway. And probably one of the most powerful ways to keep them is to actually sort of reward them and celebrate them and make them an expression or spokesperson for the brand. Question? Who's got a question? Yeah.
So with companies becoming increasingly more geographically dispersed,
Yeah.
how do you continuously provide a sense of purpose to staff that may be working out of a home office?
That's a great question. I mean, I think IBM is over 50% remote, and they've got tens of thousands of employees. I'm still adjusting to this landscape. A lot of WeFirst is distributed. I think how you create a sense of purpose is by firstly framing what your purpose is very, very clearly, creating those opportunities in which employees can play a role, and then leveraging the very same technology that allows them to work remotely to celebrate them in a purposeful way. For example, if a woman happens to volunteer at a pet shelter on the weekend, and that's in alignment with the core values of your brand, get her to do a little video about that pet shelter and what she does there, and put that on the corporate site. And she will get social currency for doing so, and in so doing, many other employees will aspire to sharing what they're doing and showing their full selves on a similar platform. So I think there's a way, whether it's through photographs, whether it's through CEO blog posts where you call out an employee and recognize them for what they're doing, whether you create an opportunity for employees to create small films or content pieces about the difference that they're making in the world, like you saw there with Whole Foods, that young lady in the kitchen who was talking about what her personal purpose is. It's about elevating them. So I don't think you all need to be in the same room to celebrate an employee anymore. I think, but rather that once we prioritize what they're doing, bring it to life in fantastic ways. And it may well be that occasionally, once a year, typically you'll come together at a huge town hall meeting or some HQ meeting or some big sales meeting rally. Bring those people on stage. Create a reward system, an award system where they get recognized and they get lunch with the CEO, or if they don't want that, a holiday somewhere far away from the CEO. But the point being that they're seen. I don't know what anyone else is like in this room, but I think many of us spend our whole lives trying to be seen in two senses. Seen outright, but seen in terms of our authentic selves. And if you give an employee a chance to show up in terms of who they are and what they care about, and you put a spotlight on that, you're going to create an advocate, a passionate advocate for the brand because they're being seen. Any other questions on employee advocacy? Yeah.
Along that same vein, not just geographic, employees all over the country, but language barriers with companies that have half your employees that don't speak primary English of your own company or the country where you sell your products.
The question was, what about language barriers? Well, the first thing you've got to do is do the Skype automatic translation now. Have you seen that? Real-time translation by Skype? It was officially launched like 3 or 4 weeks ago. Oh my God. You're talking to someone on the other side of the world, and in real time with what you're saying, it's coming out in Russian, Belgian, Portuguese, whatever you want. Astonishing. Astonishing. Real-time translation Skype. So the dating game just got interesting. But above and beyond that, invariably, the higher purpose of a company is universal and local in the way that Shannon was alluding to. When you're talking about a shared planet, you can be talking about anything from employee education through to post-traumatic stress disorder. It has such a bandwidth to it. If you have a higher order solution like a shared planet, what does shared planet mean in Portugal versus Reykjavik? Very different things, but they still ladder up to that higher order, larger proposition. So the beauty of these solutions, Smarter Planet, Food with Integrity, all these different examples that we've been talking about, is that they're at once universal and personal. So they are globally applicable, absolutely globally applicable. So I think as a two-fister, I'd say that, one is to define your purpose in a way that is at once universal and personal, and at the same time leverage tools like Skype and so on to make everybody feel connected. And the statistics in terms of how remote the workforce is going to be in the next 2 decades are staggering. Absolutely staggering. Coming together like this might be one of the last times we all get together as human beings. It's all just going to be avatars talking to each other. Any one last question?
Simon, hi, in the
Oh,
back.
hello, Colleen. Colleen
Hi.
from Head of Sustainability at Timberland.
Can you expand on, there was one segment in the session that I am having a hard time grasping.
Sure.
And that was it was a slide, common integration mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, don't talk about yourself. So I'm a little confused as we're all day today hearing about, as a company, we need to find our brand purpose,
Sure.
right? But we're not supposed to talk about ourselves. So I'm a little confused on, if you could
Sure.
expand more there.
If I wasn't clear, let me explain. We do need to talk about ourselves, but we need to do it in a certain way. We need to be off ourselves and onto the people we're talking to. So what I mean by that is, let me give you a concrete example. We are committed to gender equality, and we donate $1 million each year to the UN Women efforts. Or you say, women have the power to transform our world and to really share prosperity with an ever-growing number of people. And we want to celebrate the stories of those women who are changing their own lives, the lives of their family, and their communities at large. And your campaign is all about how the money that you have invested in them is transforming their lives and how they, in turn, are transforming others. So when you look at that GAP example, GAP didn't talk about the in-kind donation they made with training to that woman, Veronica, right? They talked about Veronica's story and the difference she is making in other people's lives. So that's what you can talk about yourself, but not in a self-directed way, but rather you want to celebrate the positive impact that's being had, and even better, to celebrate how that positive impact is having a positive impact on other people's lives. Does that make sense? So you must talk about yourself. Millennials want you to. 79% of them want you to. But you have to do it in a certain way. You have to speak in a way where you're celebrating the impact. I'll give you a concrete example. We had the wonderful pleasure of working with the Gates Foundation a few years ago around a project to launch Melinda as a brand. And Bill was perceived as being a little bit heady, and she was going to be a little bit of a tonic to that. And so the brief originally was to position her much like the First Lady and then at the time Secretary Clinton. When instead, in a collaboration, this was a collaboration with Good Magazine and TED and others, it was a wonderful collective effort. What was created was TED Exchange, which is now an annual event in October, annual event in New York. And what she does is that she celebrates the stories of unknown women around the world. And what that does is it creates a gravitational force around her of goodwill, because these anonymous women making meaningful, tangible change all around the world are being put on a pedestal thanks to her platform. And in so doing, when you create that goodwill around you, it elevates you as a brand. She is off herself and on others, and that in turn elevates her brand. Does that make sense? So, sorry?
CNN Heroes.
CNN Heroes. The halo effect for that, I watch that all the time. I cry. I cry in segments. I do this so my daughters don't see. No, it's absolutely about that relationship dynamic. Are you in a relationship with somebody because they're good for you or because you're genuinely interested in their well-being? And if you're genuinely interested in their well-being and you're contributing from that place, celebrate the difference that's being made, and that in turn will pay dividends, exponential dividends over time. Who has an idea in mind about how they should approach their social marketing, but aren't quite sure whether they're on the money, whether they're slightly 15, 30 degrees off, or they want confirmation that they're pointed in the right direction? Has any of this inspired a question in somebody? I want to make sure I'm available to ask questions. Who here's got a question about their strategy? Do you honestly know how you should approach this ever-expanding number of channels, from Facebook to Twitter to Snapchat and beyond? Meerkat? Here, question, Tess. Do we have some mic here? Thanks. No, there we go.
So we have a campaign that is just launching called Finding Gwen, which is about 17 young women from the ages of 12 up that are talking about the beauty within. And I want it to go viral, like the Dove campaign and all the other campaigns. How do we get that out there? We have it on YouTube. We have all of our social media around it. We have actually the 17 women that are in it doing social media. How does it get to go from the grassroots level to a global level?
Yeah, I think this aspiration of having a viral campaign is, it's almost irresistible, because you see those success stories. It's like hearing about those 5 or 6 companies that became billion-dollar valuations overnight in Silicon Valley, and you're like, oh my God, I want to be an entrepreneur because that's going to happen to me. It's very, very seductive. But really, the power of campaigns like Dove Real Beauty and so on is the strength of the insight that they're leveraging. And that's even more challenging nowadays than ever in the sense that beauty is becoming a crowded area, not just because of Dove, but because there's so many brands sort of unpacking this idea of objectifying women and the projection of what true beauty is brought to bear by the media. So I think firstly you need to carve out some fresh territory. And here's an example that I think is quite compelling. I'll talk about it later, but there's a campaign in the UK that won the Grand Prix at Cannes this year, the Advertising Festival, and it was This Girl Can. And it really spoke to, and we'll show a video from it, how women don't need to apologize for how they look when they're looking after themselves by exercising. And so really what they were saying is that ugly is beautiful, in the sense that you're sweating and you're doing anything but this presumption of what you're supposed to look like all the time as portrayed in the media. And that insight was very, very powerful. So I don't think it starts with the tools. I don't think it starts with the technology. I think it starts with the strength of the insight. And I think when you're talking about specifically with Beauty Within, Gwen is all about the Global Women's Empowerment Network. That's what Tess works with. And, you know, a couple of things they do which are so empowering is they created an app which allows women to nominate 5 friends. And when you are feeling either emotionally or physically threatened by somebody, you can press the button on that app and those 5 women will automatically be notified. Isn't that cool? That's awesome. So I would look to what is specific to what you do. What is unique? Because there's a whole spectrum here. Is it just you want to address the issue of beauty outright in the world? Or is it, do you want to address specifically issues that can arguably be threatening? So I think there may be an opportunity to look at, to reframe beauty in terms of strength. And because strength in a crisis situation, in that you have the strength to stand up for yourself and stop that situation, to lock yourself in a room, to close that door and to contact your friends, that's the most extreme example. And also strength in beauty in the sense that you are happy to be your honest, authentic self in public, whatever that looks like. So I guess my larger point is to look for something that differentiates yourself in an increasingly crowded category, which is women's self-awareness and how they present to the world. And the way that you'll get that unique insight is looking to what is unique about you already. And my understanding of that is that you are starting at the beginning, which is really to diminish those extreme circumstances where women are being threatened. So I think that's a counterpoint to what you're seeing with Dove Beauty, which is all like women out in the world and let's reframe what beauty looks like. You have a unique opportunity in these crisis situations to really say, hey, the beauty within, and there's beauty in strength. There's beauty in standing up for yourself. There's beauty in leveraging tools and your network and your community to let people know that you're here and you needed to be treated with respect. So does that make sense? Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, here.
So I think for the nonprofit that I work for, we have a problem.
Run a mic here, thanks.
We have a problem with evolving the conversation, like you were saying, from the self-directed to the consumer-directed.
What does your nonprofit do?
So it's Back on My Feet. We help individuals experiencing homelessness through running and through community.
Okay.
So I think one of the issues is that some people know that homelessness is an issue, but they don't necessarily kind of relate to it as much as they should.
Right.
And the way that I think we're able to help people relate to it is that running is something that a lot of people can do, and people are, when we are running with our individuals that we call members, those experiencing homelessness, it's kind of it helps everyone feel like they're wanted, part of a community,
Right.
part of a friendship circle, so to speak.
Well, if the issue is how do you not talk about yourself, you said something very powerful right then, which is that you have reframed what home is. For most people out here, home is where we're going to go home to on a plane or tonight. We're going to go and lock the door in our home, right? If you're a homeless person, home is community. You're giving them a home, even though they don't have a roof over their head, you're giving them a home, which is the fabric of that community that you're weaving. So if you can educate people that by serving that community, you are giving homeless people a home, you are doing something very, very powerful. So I think the opportunity for you to get off yourself and onto others is to educate people about the power of community and what it can mean for a homeless person. I'll tell you, we have our offices down in Venice, just behind Abercrombie. And invariably, right behind Gold's Gym, there is a whole sort of skid row, but right in front of our office all the time, there's homeless people. And I think it was about a month ago, and I was actually going for a run down on the beach after work, and there was a woman there, and she had a shopping cart with her full of bags and everything. And, you know, like everybody, I'm busy and I don't know if I have time, and I didn't have any money on me, and because I was going running gear and everything, I just got changed in my car like an Australian, sorry, got dressed in public. Ran past this woman, and she turned and she looked at me, and she gave the most beautiful bright smile I'd probably seen that day. And it really struck me. I didn't stop because I was so taken aback by it, and I did my run, and I came back. And I stopped and I talked to her, and I said to her, "You're amazing." She said, "Why?" And I said, "Because the way you smiled then was just extraordinary. Like, what are your circumstances?" And she had been on the street, I think, for 14 months. I think this is a young woman, like in her mid-30s. She'd been turned away from various churches and soup kitchens and so on, and you have to come back and there's a waiting list and all this sort of stuff. And the moment that probably stayed with me most was, you know, I went to my car and I supported her wherever I could. And then I said to her, I said, you know, hang in there. Like, your luck is going to change. And she suddenly turned into this, like, 5-year-old little girl. And she said, "Really? Do you think so?" Like, she went from being a 35-year-old woman to, like, "Is that a ring I can grab onto? Is that true?" Like, and she said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "I don't know it. I just have a feeling. Hang in there." And it was almost as I was walking away that I was some lucky talisman for her, that sort of serendipity where the universe comes along and says it's okay. And I was so struck by that responsibility, but more than ever, I was struck. She kept saying how lucky she was, and she kept saying, "I think I should be grateful." And I think about the way that we complain when our latte is 30 seconds late on a daily basis, and it makes me, I just get so incensed with myself and all of us. I am incensed with all of you. But this sense of community, like if you reframe home as people who care about them showing up, and people who see them not as some sort of moving lump of clothes on the sidewalk, but rather somebody else who is down on their luck. Like Mark Horvath, who looks after homeless people, who was a TV producer here in LA and has led awareness around homeless for so long and has humanized them by creating videos for them and so on. I think it'll be very, very powerful. So I think you need to give people a role to play by empowering them to become community architects in the service of homeless people. And then you're not talking about yourself, you're talking about them, and you're empowering them this idea that you can build this invisible fabric that will really support their lives and give them a home even if they don't yet have a roof over their head. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, a question here.
What about if your client stands for all of these things? It's a huge foundation.
Right.
They do. If your client does all of these things, that's their inherent brand.
Right.
And they do so many things globally. Is it better to? So in other words, you could run the danger of over promoting
Right.
and creating confusion in the marketplace because they do so many things. Is it better to just stick with one powerful message as opposed to showcasing a lot of their initiatives?
Should you stick with one message when your organization, nonprofit or otherwise, does many, many things? Absolutely. In an ideal world, you should be absolutely singular in what you say, but you should frame that singularity with that compressed complexity we talked about yesterday, in the sense that Shared Planet for Starbucks has allowed them to talk. You think through it in the last 5-10 years. They've talked about gridlock in Congress. They've talked about same-sex marriage. They've talked about job creation with Let's Create Jobs. They've created post-traumatic stress disorder with $30 million in donation. They've talked about online education. They've talked about racism. Why? Because that all fits under the umbrella of a shared experience of life. So when you think about your solution, which on the face of it looks so self-evident and so simple, people go, "Oh, I could have done that," like a Jackson Pollock thing. They go, "I could have done, my kid could have done that painting." Think different? I could have written those 2 words. Guaranteed, think different on a piece of paper at the beginning. Didn't look that interesting. It had to be invested with meaning and unpacked over time. So yes, singularity is, but in reality, most brands have product vans developed over here. No one's talking to each other. You're in different markets at different places at different time, and it's dysfunctional across the board. So yes, one here.
Share something with you. I think it's kind of interesting about
Yeah.
what you're talking about that I was shocked at, that I heard about. There's a guy that used to be a stockbroker. Sorry. There's a guy that was a stockbroker in New York and had always wanted to own his own pizza place.
Right.
And so he finally quit being a stockbroker, stopped making the kind of money he made, and opened up a little bitty pizza place in New Jersey. And a guy came in one day and wanted to buy some pizza, but he has, what's the deal with the guy sitting out, the homeless guy sitting out in the front of the street? He goes, "Yeah, he's there all the time. People want to give money and stuff." And so the guy went to give him $20 for a pizza that was only a couple of dollars, and he said, just keep the change, give the guy some pizza.
Yeah.
And he said, all right. And he said, but it's more than the pizza. He said, I don't know, give it to the next 5 customers.
Right.
The guy didn't know what to do. So what he did is he put a little Post-it note on, said, free pizza, and put the sticky notes up on a wall.
Right.
Nobody took them. And so he kept giving pizza to the guy, and the guy finally told the bum out on the street, told friends and stuff, so a couple came over and stuff, and other people saw it. So they started saying, I want to do the same thing. He said, the pizza's $2, put a sticky pad with it, and I'll give you $5 and buy some pizza.
Right.
It grew so fast that the wall was covered with Post-it notes with customers that were coming in.
Right.
And they didn't mind the fact that people who were homeless were coming in and sitting down next to them and having pizza also.
Yeah.
So they got so many people doing it, they couldn't possibly hand out this much pizza. So it went up on, a couple people put it up on social media. It wasn't a pizza place, it was a social media place, and they compelled the guy to put up his own thing so people could actually buy pizza for the homeless on the social media sites. And he wasn't even expecting this to happen, but it got so big, he was selling more pizza and had so much money he had made and never even sold the pizza that he needed to do something.
Isn't it
So he
cra-
started opening up more pizza places and then compelled other pizza places in New York to do the same thing. And what they ended up doing was helping a huge number of people in New York be able to feed themselves, all because one guy walked in and helped do something. It was really compelling how
It's
it
so
worked.
powerful, right? When it's organic, when it's authentic, when it's human. Colleen's story about the gentleman at Timberland who took off his boots and everyone followed the example and they had over 200 pairs of boots. That's humanity in action. And, you know, in as much as we'd like to create a viral campaign, you can't fabricate these things. There is a heartfelt moment of honesty, of compulsion, where, and that tone, you can read that tone a million miles away. People can smell BS anywhere. But if you come from that place and it starts there, it is contagious in the best sense. And that's when this technology really, really supports it. I'll take one more question and then we'll go to the work. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I do a lot of stuff, work in social media. I just wanted to say, I think you guys touched on it yesterday, but to really analyze and understand your analytics, the beauty of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube is they provide you a wealth of incredible analytics. So learn your audience because each of your businesses is different. So learn your audience, learn what your audience engages with, what type of posts that they really like and what that they don't like. So your audience might be international, so those times might not be appropriate for you. So learn where they're at, learn how old they are, learn what type of content they engage with. For example, the most important metric on YouTube is not really views, which the views look great, but retention is the most important metric. So how much of the video does your audience watch? Are they only watching 25%, 50%, 75%? So pay attention to all those things and then adjust your strategy accordingly. That's not me.
Jill, would you have that person killed immediately? You know what's really funny? The first year we ever did the We First Summit, we did it at another hotel. And while we were doing the presentation, the window washers started. Electric window washers. Bzzz, and they're looking through the window. It's full of people. They're like, hey, how you doing? We're like, could you stop the noise? But the point here is well taken, which is you've got to look at who your audience is, what they're engaging with, and how long they're engaging with it, and adjust accordingly. But I give you the caveat. I'll try and speak in the gaps. I will give you the caveat, which is you need to make sure that you start with the story. If you rob yourself of the humanity and just look for the metrics and the insights from those metrics, you can get data-driven and lose sight of the fact that you've got to connect on a human level. So let's take a few questions before we hurtle towards lunch. Who has a question in terms of community architecture? Because every single one of us in this room would welcome the opportunity to offload some of the burden we carry and transfer that to the community so we can work together and make things easier for us. So who's got a community challenge? At the back there.
Thanks. Hi. I'm Kamala with GameCollegeSystem.com. You know, our mission is to equalize access to higher education, and I'm curious about the role of crowdfunding and how that can connect to what we're talking about here. Because the conversation isn't just in the commercial realm, it's also, isn't it, through Indiegogo, Kickstarter?
Yeah, I think, you know, the shared economy and crowdsourcing, sorry, the question was, what role can this storytelling play in sort of crowdfunding to provide the solutions that we're talking about? And I think it's a very, very powerful role. I don't know if, what I find people rally around, whether it's Kickstarter or Indiegogo or any of these platforms, is they rally around the right type of story. Sometimes the product transcends it, like there's that travel jacket right now that does 37 different things that everyone's throwing so much money at that it's almost they can't help themselves. But more often than not, when you do look at those best practices in Indiegogo and Kickstarter, it's how well they've distilled their story down. And they've distilled it down not in terms of telling you what their product does, but the difference it will make in your life. So if you're a non-profit, if you're a for-profit, and you want to bring something to the world that's going to have a positive impact, the challenge is not so much the impact. The challenge, really, the preceding challenge is, what is that story I'm going to tell that's going to connect at a heartfelt level that people are going to want to participate? Because anyone can volunteer $2, $5, $10 to something that they care about, but they're not going to do it unless A, you prioritize the heart over the head, and B, you frame your story in a way that it's going to be of service to them in their lives, whether it's providing fulfillment, a role to play, a difference they're going to make. And so I think irrespective of non-profit or for-profit, I think we're all challenged with the art of storytelling more so than ever, and in particular social storytelling, because these dynamics we've been discussing for the last 2 days are really peculiar to these sort of two-way dialogues that's facilitated through social media. So does that answer your question? I think it's fundamental. Storytelling is fundamental to crowdsourcing, and I think the greatest challenge is not so much unpacking what you provided or what you want to create, but framing that story in an inclusive way, in an accessible way, in an inspirational way where people go, that's something I want to be a part of. And sufficiently motivated, I'll put $5, $10, $100 towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the features and benefits are separate from the heart piece.
And then once you've got the heart piece, you can talk about features and benefits all day long because it's social proof of your commitment to whatever higher aspiration you've articulated. Yeah.
So my question is about the relationship with the, thank you. So we're a small nonprofit. You had quite an impact on us last year because we did our whole rebranding after.
I ruined everything. Oh, damn it, we first, you people.
So this year's challenge is a little different. We take manufacturers' waste and use it in the schools for project-based learning.
Right.
One of the organizations that will remain unnamed that sends us material and in the past gave us money is in the arms business. And so I have a half of my board that says, money is money, we're a small nonprofit, we can't turn anybody away. They haven't offered us lately, but they've asked me to write a grant to the same company. And it is against everything I stand for, and we're going into the world of children, and so I sort of feel very torn because if you have a sponsor on your website or in your story that you don't have any, that you have an ethical problem with,
Sure.
then
What do you do?
Yeah.
The question is, what do you do if there is a sponsor or a partner that you have an association with that doesn't align from a values point of view, but in truth you need the money because that allows you to do what you're going to do. Here's the reality. You need to think about your brand as a story, and the partners you have are different characters in that story. And if those characters are not playing a meaningful role, they shouldn't be there. And I actually would reframe that as an opportunity. And I just want, as context, have you noticed how Mark Zuckerberg and Leonardo DiCaprio and the Rockefeller Foundation, they're all divesting themselves of investment in fossil fuel companies now because of the brand association, the values association, and so on? So I would actually see it as an opportunity. I would say we are looking to rethink, reorder, reprioritize our partners in alignment with our core values. And that's going to involve a hit to some extent. There's going to be a cost associated with that. In which case, we are looking for partners who might be able to step into that gap. Partners that believe in the same things we do. Partners that believe in this, this, and this, and this. And when you speak to them, when you get some feedback on that, say to them, here's the reality. We think there's a lack of alignment, integrity between this partnership in the past. Remaining nameless or whatever it may be. But with that in mind, you can help us move beyond that. So your contribution is doubly meaningful because it creates the integrity we need to have as a brand, and at the same time, it enables us to do the work that we want to do. So I think every challenge like that is an opportunity if you don't look at it as, oh my gosh, we've got to survive, but rather, how do we lean into our values? How do we lean into our values? Because that's what's going to connect at a heart level with those new potential donors at the same time. Does that help? Any other questions? Anyone coming to mind? How do you architect a community? There must be challenges over there.
I have a program called Bestseller in a Weekend. I help people write nonfiction books in this program, and I do this thing called Client of the Week, where I highlight an author who's written a book. But from your ideas, I decided, first of all, not call it Client of the Week, but call it Author of the Week. And instead of me kind of bestowing this honor, I'm going to have because I have a really great community on Facebook of people who've written their books, have them, and they talk and they engage, and so have them offer or announce an Author of the Week of someone else, that they acknowledge someone else. So instead of it coming from me, it comes from them. And then it's a lot less work for me too.
Right.
So anyways.
We can all rest easy now. This crowdsourcing thing is awesome.
Yes. It does alleviate the work because it's a collaboration. It's collaborative marketing versus doing everything yourself as a solo proprietor.
Right.
So.
No, I would look to crowdsourcing as a wonderful opportunity to tap into the intellectual capital that you have out there, whether it's an idea for a new product or to beta test something, or really just to ask them, like Sevenly does, what do you care about and how can we align around that? And then what you've done is you've already pre-qualified people who are going to be interested in what you're going to support. So do you think they're going to amplify it? Absolutely, because they're the ones that defined it in the first place. So these dynamics are very self-evident when you shift your mindset from self-directed sort of self-interest to collaborative and contributive sort of contribution, then suddenly all these different dynamics can play into your favor. I'll take one last question before we go to fine food and a fine break and everyone's, after everyone's wonderful attention this morning. Who's got one more question? Over here. And then I'll be here for the next few minutes, for the next half an hour, answering any other questions that you have, as I said this morning.
Hi, I consult in the space every day, and actually purpose is the easy part in the equation when it comes to my clients. It's the other P, profitability, and the expense side of the equation when you're trying to institute programming. And especially for small to medium-sized companies, either in startups who are trying to either accelerate within a current model or ingratiate it into their startup model. It would be awesome, and maybe you guys can actually spearhead an open source kind of tool sharing and metric sharing where we can, small to medium-sized companies can come and see how other companies have measured and then successfully measured the profitability, the ROI, both internally and externally. It would generate a lot more better conversations with CFOs and shareholders. For those of us who are trying to, extend the bandwidth of this movement.
Yeah, the challenge, everyone is trying to work out that balance between profit and purpose. Certainly, your potential stakeholders, internal and external, respond to purpose. But here's the reality, here's the truth. Purpose is a slower build. Relationship capital is a slower build. It's not transactional. It's not one and done and moving on to the next person. And typically, when you see these success stories up on the screen, they're a function of momentum that has been built over time. And I almost admire that, or I almost welcome that, because it forces us to be genuine about the integrity of our commitment. Because if it can be done in 3 months or 6 months, could you imagine what would happen out there? Could you imagine everyone would sort of leverage it or just disingenuously use it to get ahead, rather than actually reaching out to your community and as a slow build, making a difference that is sufficiently meaningful that they want to share it with others. So it's not the easiest answer, but that's the real answer. And I think all of us, big brands and small, are trying to throttle, trying to calibrate. How do we leverage purpose in the right way that it actually drives revenue that allows us to grow the company so we can have greater impact? And you're seeing that with Paul Polman all the way through to startups. But one thing I do know to be true, which is that given a choice between pure profit and pure purpose, given all the information we've been sharing the last couple of days, the starting point is purpose. And that, in turn, is the fastest through line, not to immediate profit, but long-term sustained profitability for your company, because you're building relationship capital. And I don't think that's peculiar to this day and age. I think that's always been the case. When you have the goodwill, loyalty, and trust of customers, and they recommend you to others, that is the greatest asset you have. Not the products you make or the buildings you have, but rather the customers you can keep. Who needs help defining what their cultural conversation is? Let's do it right now in the room. Gentleman in the back.
Hi there. My name is Paresh Shah, and I run a company called Glimpulse, and we have been scribbling lots of notes, and this has been awesome. I've met just amazing people who I've ended up kissing, hugging, loving.
Whether they asked for it or not, he was just kissing them. Was it last night? No.
So we're creating a company that spreads love to elevate humanity, and we figured out a way to do that on a grand scale. But we don't know which conversation to start because people don't know what love is what I'm finding. Where do you begin?
You know, I think love, this is a really difficult question because love is probably the most bastardized, co-opted, misappropriated term of any in the advertising world. Would you say love? I mean, but I think love is a window into something far more, well, something very profound. And that is, it's the facilitator of the connection between the individual and everybody else. Love is that through line between me and you and who you care about and beyond. And so when I think about love as a proposition, I look at it more through the lens of connection. And if I think about it through connection, because a lot of people talk about connection, telco and otherwise, I think, well, what is the purpose of connection? And I think ultimately it's about unity. And there's a lot of ideas around the unified field and singularity and lots of different things coming. But I think there's a lot of power in addressing that human need to know that you're not alone, that we are all part of the same organism, the same field, in a sense, and that by tapping into that connection between us, arguably there's nothing we can't do for ourselves and for others. So when I look at the word love, I look at it, where my head goes, is to look at it from a place of unity, of oneness, of connection, and then to articulate how that's going to show up in somebody's life and what it's going to mean to them. So I think what I'd like you to take away from that is that when you think about the vehicle that's going to get you there, which in this case is love, the how, ask yourself, what is the why? And the way to do that is to say, to what end? What is the purpose of love? If we facilitate love between everybody on the planet in the highest order sense, what's going to happen? We are going to rediscover what we always forgot. This is not something new.
Right.
We're just rediscovering something we always forgot, which is our innate connectedness to each other, both to each other and to the planet. And if you can unpack that for people, they will take great confidence on a personal level, but then on a collective level, you'll feel incredibly empowered. And when you do that, suddenly it'll allow people not to do new behaviors, but to dissolve that thinking and behavior that's getting in the way, the barriers they put in front of themselves. Does that help?
Separation.
Okay.
So something like we're connecting you to the one field of possibilities.
Yeah, I think you need to look at, I mean, the language in this area, you know, whether it's the personal development space, the spiritual space, the yoga space, a lot of it has been so overused that it's rendered meaningless.
That's right.
So one of the challenges, it's like finding a URL now. You know, you have to put a group or something at the end of it because every name has been taken. When you look at this language, you have to find something that's fresh that you can define, because the best way to own a category is to define it. And I'll give you a concrete example. We worked with Nativa, which is a super organic food company, last year, and everything in the organic space had been done and been done. Where we ended up, which you now see on their website, is nurture vitality. And nurture is a very evocative idea that hasn't been unpacked yet. It hasn't been kind of drained of all its meaning out in the marketplace through overuse. And vitality is very, very versatile in the sense that there's personal health and well-being, but there's also living with vitality and the planet's vitality and so on. So the challenge is, I would look to, not to love, but look to the end result of love, which is all around unity and oneness and connection, and then look at the language and start to unpack what that language is that's fresh and peculiar to you, and then get very frustrated for a period of time, shake it all off, and then stand back and go, oh, there it is, and it'll be right in front of you. Does that help?
Helps a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Mr. Bailey, you've got a funny accent. I can't understand a word you're saying.
Yes, a fellow Australian. We've talked a lot about change over the last couple of days, and I've found it particularly fascinating because I'm working with a company called Door of Clubs. And that company works with students and companies that could potentially hire them. And the problem in the world today, or in America, is 86% of students graduate from college without a job. So this company went out there and created an online platform which makes perfect sense, where student clubs had got their own like a persona, and then companies have got a persona, and they connect with one another. Okay, so what's the point? The point that I've realised after these last couple of days is connecting them isn't enough. That is not the cultural conversation. The cultural conversation, which I literally just wrote in the last 10 minutes, which I think is closer, and Simon will tell me whether I am or not, is our company makes it easier for students and companies to discover one another and create successful relationship through aligned values. You can't tell anything about anyone's value through a resume.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about that, I think it's very true. You could think of yourself as an online platform that connects graduates and you facilitate their job search and so on. Or you could flip it and say, we are creating a community of graduates who are given the opportunity to find what they care about and to identify those companies that are in alignment with their values. It's almost like the company has to pre-qualify themselves to be of interest to you. And there's this sorting system through your platform which allows people to validate and elevate their personal values and let that inform their careers. And then you provide a service where you say, these are the values of the companies that align with your personal values. And imagine the conversation that drives when you go inside to a company and you say, I'm applying for this job because here's what I care about. And here's what's going to shape my life moving forward. It's this, 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 and this. And I'm here because I so admire your work, which is in alignment with these values. So yes, I'm interested in the details of the position. But most importantly, I'm aligned with what you want to achieve in the world. Compare that to the next candidate who comes into the room. They're going to be like, oh my God, we want you. You're hired. Everyone else go home. Because you can't teach that stuff. And is there a follow-up you want to have, and then I'll...
The thing that I was just seeing is that, you know, we look at the slides and we see people like Howard Schultz, and I'm sure a lot of us are working with companies going, there's no Howard Schultz there. And it's very hard to change behaviour at the top, but the recognition of no, but how do we create a space that allows the next Howard Schultz to come through the door because they've got the right values and they can live up to the values of the company, sometimes is an easier task than trying to change it at the top.
I just know that millennials and Gen Z come to the world like Howard Schultz. They know what their values are, they know they want to care about something, and they want to realize it in the world through their vocation in some way. You don't need to wait to be CEO to think and act that way. And you will conduct yourself in a very different way, and you'll unlock very different opportunities when you lead with your values, much the same way that Howard Schultz is in that unique position that he is now. So we're going to move on now. We're going to go to the break workout session. If you do have questions, please raise your hand and I'll run around and see you. I've been over this side of the room a little bit. I'll start here and work my way across there. So we've got 15 minutes to work on Module 6 in our workbooks.